This meeting.
Okay. All right. So, well, let me get back to the share. Share. There we go. Okay. All right. All right. We are. Listen here somewhere. Okay. Last week we finished up some things, and we basically talked about the issue of egos, the king's ego. Sometimes our egos get bigger than God. So, are we being humble before the Lord? Is that something we're learning? Can we learn from Belshazzar? Do we need to learn a lesson there? Do we need to learn to spend more time alone with God? You know, obviously there was some boldness that Daniel had last week when he called him out in front of everybody. Um, you know, we need to take time to learn from God, to understand God's ways, to be able to speak truth when it's needed. What's sacred? Some things are sacred, some things are legalism. Focus on those that are sacred, not the side issues. Um, Focus on the things that are related to worshiping God, not the rules in themselves. And those are the things we've been learning over the last few weeks. We can get caught up in legalism, and there's a lot of that going on today, a lot of legalism going on, and so we need to learn the difference. It's also really something I'm going to focus on today, the issues of what's different. What is different? What changes have impacted the church? We can talk about technology changes, over our lifetime, and and that's easy to talk about. But there's been a lot of changes. In fact, in the last few years, there's been a lot of changes in the church. A lot of things have forced changes. Uh, some have been good, some may not have been good. Some may have been God making the changes, but some we want to hold on to sometimes. So we have trouble understanding that. So the some churches have made changes and they're adapting well, and they're healthy. A healthy church, I'm going to define it as, you know, they're healthy and they're growing. This author, I'm going to give you two different authors' perspectives. That doesn't mean I totally agree with them, but I'm just telling you their perspectives because it gives you a little perspective of how the world, especially the younger generations, are looking at what's happening in the church. Okay, so I want you to be aware of what they're thinking. Uh, the they're saying is some of the changes. He said a healthy church hasn't compromised doctrine. Okay. Um, I'm not sure that means all growing churches have not compromised doctrine. I would say that there's probably some growing churches that may have compromised doctrine. That's hard. That's a difficult one because we can go and we can nitpick a little bit sometimes. Uh, Centrality of the preaching, you know, that's diminished a little bit, but nobody has um, abandoned sharing the gospel. Preaching is still core. Is what that meant. It didn't come out the way it was really meant. And but nobody a growing church or a healthy church is not abandoned sharing the gospel. Okay, how you do that is really is what's really been affecting the church. So what's really important to church or relationship to God, we'll look at in these studies. One guy came in and said, in the last 10 years, we've gone from larger worship services to smaller worship services. I thought that was odd. I didn't really sense that, but I thought that was odd because he said they've gone to more multi-site churches, where you're beaming stuff across, and they're smaller and they're non-traditional worship times. So a lot of different worship times, okay, to try to reach people, different things. And he mentioned the desire among millennials is to be part of a smaller gathering rather than a larger one. I thought was odd, So that's his perspective. I thought that was interesting. He said smaller
Both
church.
of our sons have told us that kind of what we think of as traditional church just doesn't speak to them as much.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to hit that in a minute too. That's one of the other things I'm going to hit a little bit later on. Smaller church facilities versus larger. They're not spending funds on the bigger facilities. Obviously, that makes sense. Unless that, what that does though, is you get the smaller facilities, you don't have space for small groups like Sunday school. Or so what they're doing is they're meeting offsite. And so I know where my son is going is all the small groups meet offsite. Okay. And so, and on non-worship days. And then that means smaller worship centers too. Priority on staff hiring, I thought this was interesting, was children's ministry. Okay. Because they really needed safe, sanitary, educational place for their kids. So that became priority. Other thing that's changed is ministry degrees for the staff, not the head staff. A lot of times they're calling people in the congregation to do those positions like children's minister, those kinds of things, youth minister, those kinds of things. So that emphasis on congregational singing. I didn't totally understand where they were headed there, but it said used to be more on performance of the praise band and the other performance of the choir and soloists, but now it's more congregational singing. So I thought that was an odd one. Community focus versus community myopia. Interesting. That's certainly something we wanted here. Is to a lot of churches in the past 2 decades, it says abandon the communities, and they're paying the price now for their short-sightedness. Okay. The 10 years ago, there was marginal importance to the small groups. Today, it's vital importance to the small groups. The church lives or die on the small groups. Right? Get involved in small group. And it enhances the discipleship, evangelism, prayer ministry, and everything like that. Church leaders are continuous learners versus 10 to 20 years ago, they were degreed and done. I thought that was an interesting note. That sort of follows society too, but continuous education kinds of things. So those are the things that they said taking place over the last 12 years. That was theirs. Okay. Another one I'm going to go through, another study, I thought this was really interesting. It says there's a study from Beloit College. It talks about the mindset of folks coming to the college every year. Okay? And this is important because when you want to start thinking about it, it says the class of 18-year-olds coming in, and this was the study from 2019, it said the people coming into college, what they know in the world is things like The Lion King has always been on Broadway ever since they've been born. Okay? They have never licked a postage stamp. So they have no concept of what you're talking about. The Princess Diana, Big, whoever that is, Jacques Cousteau, and Mother Teresa were not alive in their lifetime. It's hard to imagine because Princess Diana, you think about it almost like it was yesterday. Okay? Hong Kong has always been under Chinese rule, which surprised me. I didn't realize it had been that long now.
1995.
Yeah. So hybrid automobiles have always been mass produced in their lifetime. So, things that, you sit there and you think, these things aren't going to stay around because they just started yesterday, or everyday things for those generations. Okay. So the world's changed. So church leaders that don't move on, or don't understand it, have trouble speaking the language of the younger people or doing that or answering the right questions. And so that's where this author is doing. This church attendance is now a fringe activity, and I thought that was an interesting comment. He said, nobody asked, he said, except in the Deep South, nobody asks you which church you attend anymore because they assume you don't go anywhere. Okay? In the South, you'll still see that some, but sometimes folks are afraid to do that because of that. A lot of cities have gone away from a lot of the basic Christian tenets that you see. Church doesn't mean church attendance is impossible, but it's not a norm that used to be. So attendance is a sort of a fringe activity. All welcome means nothing. He said, church sign saying all welcome. If you go to a church, would you look at that and take that as an invitation that you could come in? You know, so the second question to ask is what would it take you? What would it take to convince me that I could walk in uninvited to participate in what they're doing? Where he's headed there is talking about if you're unchurched, there ain't nothing on that that's going to do that. He says the only way non-Christians will show up to Christians' activities is through personal invitation. Okay? And that makes sense, is we can put our banners out, all welcome, whatever, and all that kind of stuff. But somebody that's not a norm for them aren't going to pop in. So the people that pop in every week are somebody that either had a background as a kid or came from somewhere else where they were involved.
Would it be better out on the reader board to put lunch today at 12 o'clock?
Yeah.
Free lunch today.
Free lunch.
Well, what was different in Britain is because of that coffee shop, people were coming in, and it was just automatic to get coffee, to get some. They had some good cakes and things, they had. So to get some stuff there, and then you meet them while they were there as part of it. So that was the thing.
Well, we lived with the if you build it, they will come mentality for way too long.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we see that now, as you already mentioned, that most churches now, it's all about the small group. People come to the small group because they have a friend there that's bringing them with them.
So that's-
Well, when
That's why Sunday school classes are so important.
Yeah.
That's where you learn the people, not in the big church service.
But we need to think of it as something besides Sunday school. It's during the week, it's at people's homes, it's small groups everywhere,
yeah.
and all the time.
Sunday
It's-
school
it's
doesn't have a good
connected.
connotation anymore.
Yeah, I'll tend to use Bible study to somebody new or somebody visiting because they don't have that concept. Now, the other thing on it is I'll tell you, when they gave out the small list group, the small list was golfers, bowlers, dancing, divorcees, it grouped you according to interest.
More affinity groups.
Yep, exactly. So you could identify with folks, do those kind of things with them, stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. And this group was huge. This was at Highlands. But the other thing that we think that are contemporary, it's funny, is that he said this issue of contemporary is really not contemporary. And I started thinking back. I said, contemporary service has been around for 50 years. Okay. Now back when we originally started it, we did a really poor job of it. We just sort of tried to do it and do whatever, but it did. So those kind of things aren't contemporary, and are we really, sometimes we're fooling ourselves by calling it contemporary.
Yes.
Okay. So you got to look at it from that. Our production levels have grown drastically, especially through COVID. We're doing better production. The other thing that's different is church members are no longer only know one pastor. You listen to pastors online, you listen to podcasts by other pastors and all those kinds of things. There are other folks there. Your pastor has to be secure that his folks are getting advice from other pastors nowadays. God has become generic. The term God, the only difference becomes is the differential becomes Jesus. The issue of God, everybody has become very, very generic. Jesus is the only thing that we can keep separate. Okay, so this post-Christian error, God is generic, Jesus is specific, Jesus is personal. That's the differentiation. So as we do this, and the second thing you talked about is conversion. most people, especially from the outside, don't have the earthliest idea what we're talking about on conversion. What it's about, what it means, and all of that. We've got to explain it differently to a non-Christian, folks that have no background. A lot of people that are coming, especially non-Christians, have no background in the Bible whatsoever, Moses, David, whatever. So we've got to do that. We've got to deal with this issue of culture and how we're witnessing to them and stuff like that. So, Ravi Zacharias basically made a comment. He said, I have better reception for people receiving the gospel and stuff on folks that had no church background than folks that did and left, because those folks tend to have a negative connotation of church. Okay. So those alter, and I'm running out of time here. So the concept of living for God is alien to most people. We have to do a better job of explaining it. We have to make it personal. We have to make it life-changing. We have to focus on Jesus. Okay? We have to start really thinking about it. Okay. So the issue of change, what can we change and not change, which is sort of core to what the lesson was today. You know, if there was a law about praying that you'd be thrown in jail or killed, would you be convicted? Okay? If there was a law about going to church, would you be convicted? That's probably an easy one to be convicted of. Okay? If there's a law about witnessing, would you be convicted? And I started thinking about it. I was talking to somebody about it. He said, well, most people say, I don't do it anyway, so no, I guess I wouldn't. So, you know, so that's the thing. Is there a law about reading God's word? Would you be convicted? So what would you do? How would you do, you know? So that's sort of the thing today is you know, are we serious about following the Lord? It's probably more the lesson than the issue of boldness. I'll get back to the boldness at the end, but let's read through this because the lesson is really fairly simple and straightforward from you guys' perspective, because y'all know this like the back of your hand. So go ahead and let's read it and we'll just talk through it quickly.
So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors, have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce and edit that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edit and sign the document so that, as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed. So King Darius signed the written edit. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in his upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before.
Okay. Now they did what I always hate. They come into a story without you having the background. Okay. So the issue is, you remember last week, Darius conquered Babylon, you know, basically in a day. So it was a pretty phenomenal thing of the walls that were impenetrable, so to speak. So all of a sudden, it just converted into chapter 6, and you're doing that. So the first part of chapter 6, Darius appointed 120 satraps, were basically just governors. And then I'll use the term super governor because, quite frankly, that's used in that area. We had those in Turkey that just sort of oversaw multiple governors' areas, so to speak. It did that. He appointed 3 officials. Daniel was one, and it said to whom all of them should give account, because Daniel was one of them. The king, so he said, so the king wouldn't suffer loss. It's basically an accounting issue, okay? Making sure everything tax was done right, those kinds of things. So this is Daniel became distinguished above, better watch my words there, distinguished above all of them because he had an excellent spirit within him. And the king planned to set him above the whole kingdom. Okay? So now all the other guys are like, what gives? What's so good about Daniel? Okay? So
And he's not one of them.
he's not one of them, which you'll find out here in a little bit, as they come back. You know, they're jealous. They're trying to find ground for complaint. That's what it's saying in these verses right before. Trying to find something in regard to the kingdom. Well, they couldn't find anything on him, so they probably, had their private investigator following him, and they're looking at him, and probably, quite frankly, if like in a lot of places, they probably paid some folks to try to seduce him, probably did whatever, to do it, and he was above reproach. Okay? So the only thing they found that could complain against him was the issue is he's a godly man. Okay? So if you're going to beat him, you're going to have to beat him in connection with related to the law of God. Okay? So the plot begins. Okay? So they go to the king, and they didn't just walk up and hand him this edict because he didn't know something's going on. He's not there because he's stupid. Most leaders didn't get there because they're stupid. There's a few, we won't name this, but they didn't get there because they're stupid. They did something right, and they're pretty smart anyway. Okay, so they backdoored the king. Probably got him drinking. Okay, you're great, king. You just conquered Babylon. Without having to even breach the walls. Okay? You're as good as God. You ought to be God. By the way, let's just celebrate you. Doesn't that sound like a good idea? Such a great king, such a great thing. So they sit there and they appeal to his ego. And I'm sure none of you like people appealing to your ego. And sort of butter you up, and then all of a sudden you sit there and you agree to something you wouldn't agree to before. Better just sort of be straightforward with you, because they've got you all going. So you sit there and you see Darius, and yeah, you know what? I am good. I'm great. I'm good. I'm good. He said, I'm equal to God. God Himself. So, we've had that problem with the last two presidents. This president and the last one. They got an ego. Okay, and so it's got a hold of them, and it's really sort of affected some things that they did. Okay, so let's have, so here they go. Let's have a month to celebrate you. Sounds good, he says. So they come in, present the stuff. Hard to dispute that. What's the harm? Let's just go celebrate for a month. And oh, by the way, whoever doesn't celebrate you, let's just have them killed, because we don't want them around anyway.
The theme song was How Great I Am.
Yeah. So it's I always think of Frank Sinatra's My Way.
Yeah.
It's not a good song.
No, I always switch it when it gets that. It's sort of like, okay, I did it my way, and that's what it is. That's sort of what this is here. Now, just a side note, Darius is probably Cyrus the Great. In history, there's no Darius mentioned. In the 28th verse, it talks about Darius and Cyrus the Great. It implies they're the same person, which is what sort of history implies also. So that's probably the two. So that's really more of a side note. It really doesn't affect anything. So they set up this law, made sure it couldn't be revoked, more than just this verbal thing, trying to make it probably whole part of the process, let's make a grand signing ceremony and all this kind of thing. So even the king can't sign it. The same thing happened later. Where else did they make a law that couldn't change, and you didn't realize how big the implications were? Esther's.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Same thing, same group. It was the Persians. Okay. Okay. So
Lester, did the Islamic, Islam, did they get from this last thing about 3 times that they vowed? You think that was the emphasis for praying to Mecca 3 times? You don't understand what I'm saying, or no? Okay, in Islam, you're supposed to face Mecca when you pray, and isn't that 3 times?
3 times.
Yeah.
3 times
Yeah.
a day,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
And I'm
there's
wondering if
that's
they
what-
took it from
Yeah,
this.
Daniel said he
Probably did.
faced Jerusalem and 3
It's
times.
probably done that. I'm gonna hit that in just a second, but yeah.
Okay,
it's a good-
I didn't mean to get off
No,
track.
no,
It
but the
just-
Muslims did that well, and I
Yeah.
think I mentioned a few weeks ago, and Hagia Sophia, which is it was Saint Sophia, Constantinople had set forth, there in Istanbul. It's built, the front piece faces Jerusalem. So when the Muslims took over, the front piece is it's got a little bit, they changed and put another row definer in and do it, and it's, maybe 8 degrees difference so that it faces Mecca. Okay, so that's the thing you see different in that, so they could do that.
Sorry to get us
Yeah.
off track.
And then they covered up all the mosaics because they don't have people in their mosaics, and so the big huge mosaic of Constantine, was covered with plaster. And so quite frankly, would preserved a whole lot of mosaics because they covered them all in plaster, on that. So okay, so you got that. So he's made this. And so you go in and Daniel learned what happened. What Daniel do? Well, we do what we always did. Okay? So what do you think he prayed for? This is just speculation, because
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you any real wisdom on it. I didn't get a sign.
Lord, I'm a baby, please don't let him kill me.
Could be. That's what the author said. Go ahead.
Pray for a total change to face God.
Okay.
Yep.
Worship Him.
Maybe
You know?
praying that Darius would have a dream and he'd get to interpret it.
That's good.
I'm not sure that, you got to remember, how old was Daniel now?
80s?
80. I'm not sure he really cared a lot about the thing, just because, there's some other, because one, you just got the deal when he came in and Belshazzar, when he confronted Belshazzar, that would have got most people killed. Okay, so I don't think that, his
80,
tolerance of
yeah.
that.
At 80 years old, I don't think his prayers will change.
No,
He
I
says,
really don't.
he says, this says Daniel knew prayer is essential for a person of faith and that it changes things.
and I'm not sure he prayed worried about himself or whatever else. He prayed just because that's what he always did. He had a relationship with God and he continued that. That's what it's about. Okay? Now that's what like I said, I'm speculating there, but that's what I feel just because, just a little bit of the nature of what you saw happen with Belshazzar and then what you're seeing here. So he prayed it through, and so now the reason they prayed face Jerusalem really came about from Solomon. Solomon, when he dedicated the temple in 960 BC, the dedication was in 1 Kings 8 chapter 48. It says, if they repent with all their heart when they're carried off into captivity, it's funny, he's sort of knowing that they might be carried off way back before then. He says, they're carried off, have them pray to you towards their land, okay, which you gave them to their fathers, the city that you have chosen, okay, and the house that I have built for your name. Okay, so you see where they got the thing where they prayed to Jerusalem. Okay, he says, then here in heaven, your dwelling place, their prayer and their plea and maintain their cause. Okay, so that was Solomon's dedication prayer. So that's why they're doing this, is because Solomon said this is going to happen, and you continue to do this wherever you are. Face Jerusalem, do this prayer. Okay, pretty cool, huh? So now, how if someone had, Daniel was characterized as a man who prayed, how would someone characterize you? Somebody had to characterize you. Would it be godly man, a praying man, grumpy old man?
Miscreant?
What?
Miscreant?
Okay. All right. Second set of verses here. Somebody get that.
Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, as a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. Then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day.
Okay? Sort of funny how these guys came about it. It says in this version, says they came by agreement. Said they came by group. Some of the translation. What is your
A group.
group? Okay. So you got this. These guys are just sneaking around and watching him. And they wanted more than one so that they could, have some backup to the accusation. Okay? To the accusation. They needed some backup. So they came as a group. So they knew he was doing this and they want to see if he's still following it. Quite frankly, they're hoping he still follows.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
That was the whole point of the edict,
Well,
to get rid of him.
yeah, these guys, Daniel's doing it. Daniel's messing up their lifestyle. Okay. They go on. They said, and so they approach it. They back into it again. Didn't you do this? It's almost like, seems like I recollect that you signed an edict not long ago about how great you were, and everybody will do it. So they're really careful about doing it because were they careful about how they worded it?
Can you kill them too?
Well, yeah, I mean, this guy had a lot of respect for Daniel. He's about to make him the number 2 guy in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't come in with this head on. Say, I don't like this guy. And you shouldn't like him either. They do that. So they had to plot this very carefully about what they did. They laid it out. They said somebody's broke the law of all things. We just happened to be looking in his window one day, saw him praying. So they figured that out, did that. But what else did they talk about Daniel? And you John, you mentioned it a minute ago. Daniel was what? What was Daniel and what did they accuse him of being here?
Remember when they said he was an exile?
He's an exile. He's an outsider. Folks have come in here and they don't respect what's going on. So they sit there and basically, in CZ, people still do that. You thought we'd be best at, but people still discriminate. And they still encourage other people to discriminate. And it's contagious sometimes. I mean, being bullies is contagious sometimes. Okay? There's that kind of a thing, so discrimination, racism, he's not one of us kind of thing, And by the way, what?
He ain't from around.
He ain't from around here. You don't know our ways. There's no telling what he might
We're
do.
not talking about people that go to Auburn or go to Alabama.
Uh,
Tennessee.
That's getting religious on us now.
It's funny. You saw how Amos took care of that problem. You saw what school he made his school.
Taylor?
No. What's the group over on the other side of town here? Texas, Alabama A&M, isn't it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he came Alabama A&M shirt.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, you know what? I said, that is worse here than politics. So I said, that'll get you run out faster than anything. So,
Mr. Daniel's how many chapters, basically? Do you remember?
I think it's 12, I think.
Okay. And I didn't go back and look at it, and I should have, but
Exactly.
13.
I didn't go back and look at it. Was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before, or was that after this? We
I think
read
The
this
fiery
I think it's
furnace
before.
was before.
before. So they've already tried to get him once, right? Or his buddies at least.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that was a different king.
I told John, I
Yeah.
felt really stupid because all of these years, I never put 2 and 2 together that Daniel had the fiery furnace and the lion's den. Just, the stories were this story and then that story.
Well,
Well, where were they now? Where were, I mean, were those,
don't know, don't know.
we don't know that
You
kind of
don't mention,
stuff.
because you've got a lot of gaps
Yeah, that's
in
what
the
I'm trying
thing,
to
and
say.
so you don't know if they're still alive or
Right,
what.
right.
You know,
Okay,
like I say, he's 81, I think,
I imagine that.
and he doesn't live much longer here. But the thing is he's done that, and so you don't know what he's done. But he's such a godly man. He's been put in position. So
Yeah.
within a year or whatever after Darius has taken over, he's promoted him. Right. So, but what they're going on here, and the point here is they're talking about he's praying 3 times a day. So he's persistent, and he's a malicious offender of your laws. And that he's not only ignored your edict, it's a direct and personal affront to you. And that's the point they're trying to make.
Yeah.
Okay. But the king, that you'll find in a minute, like I say, that's the other stuff that we don't read, that he's still sits there. So let's read these verses. I know it's a mixed bunch of verses here. So go ahead.
So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him in the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then Daniel spoke with the king. "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him and also before you. Your Majesty, I have not done harm." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God.
Right? So again, ask the questions, or like, what practice do we do that demonstrates our trust for God to others? What part of our life does that? Because King Darius was not ignorant of Daniel's faithfulness. Okay? So he knew that. He just got suckered into this, and you see he's regretting it, and we'll know it in a minute too, because we got to get the in-between verses. So he's not ignorant of that, so whatever's going on. So the king went that night into the palace, spent the night fasting once they threw him into the den, okay? And at the break of that day, he rose, went in haste to do that. As he came near the den, Daniel, he cried out in a tone of anguish, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions?" Right? And so what happened? The next day, what did Daniel's respond?
May the king live forever. God shut the lion's mouth.
Okay, he honored the king versus saying nanny nanny boo boo.
Yeah, he wasn't arrogant. He wasn't arrogant at all.
No,
Not at all.
he sits there very respectful, even though he's been hanging out with the lions all night.
Yeah.
He gave glory to God, but he also declared, "I'm innocent before God, and I'm also innocent before who? Before the king."
Yeah.
So he's saying, because this law was meant to sit there and to highlight people that were doing harm towards the king. Okay? And so he's basically saying that. In fact, he goes into it. He said, I have not done any harm. Okay? I have not done any harm. The prayers did not harm the king. I have not disrespected the king. Basically, the point he made. Okay? All right. So what's the Paul Harvey ending? You know what I mean? What's the rest of the story? He was excited about it. So what do you remember what the king did?
Threw them all
Threw all
in
them
the
and
lions.
their families, wives and their kids to
Yeah.
the lions. And it said before they hit the ground, what happened to them?
Chomp, chomp.
It says all their bones were broken. So that's some pretty good lines. So it says one is,
They were hungry.
yeah, the lions had not been fed beforehand.
Yeah.
That's not why they didn't eat Daniel. And so all of that. And then King Darius wrote, it says, peace be multiplied to you. It says, I make a decree that all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Okay? It says, for he is a living God, enduring forever. And then he goes on to say, delivers and rescues he who saved Daniel. Okay? Pretty cool. Pretty cool.
It is. That's good.
Okay. In conclusion, you know, we express gratitude to God. We've got to pray constantly. You sit there and you see, praying is more than what we're wanting. Praying is praising God. Praying is doing other things. We got to make it regular. We got to make it personal. We got to be thankful for God. We got to examine our lives. Do our standards match God's? Are we going to be convicted, so to speak, of being a God worshiper or being a Christian? I'll just say a believer, because everybody can say, "Oh well, the guy believes in God." I just didn't know what God will do. Yeah, the issue is do people see that we love Jesus? You know, does our life convict us? The last part of it is be courageous, be bold. We use the term when we're in our mission trip, be bold. You know, which forced us to have to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to be bold today because what do I have to lose? You know, we need the same thing. Or we be bold, and you know, we've been wanting to witness to somebody for a long time. Take this chance today and be bold. Say, God, give me the words I need to do. Be bold about what you're doing, about the right things too. You know, don't be pointing out the wrong things. You know, focus on their relationship with God, evangelism, stuff like that. Don't try to change how they act. Too many people today, politics and everybody else, trying to change the way everybody acts. We're not here to do that. We're here to share the gospel. So let's concentrate and be bold on the right things: evangelism, discipleship. Okay? All right, let's go to Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you so much for today, and we pray, Lord, that hopefully we're able to see a little bit more out of Daniel Day and a little bit more, dear Lord, about what's happening in the world and why we're not as effective. And Lord, open our eyes that we might be more effective. Open our eyes that we might focus more on Jesus and not all the little rules and all the differences and those things. Help us, dear Lord, to get bold and to be bold for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, folks.
Anybody else besides Tyler and Sheila?
No, that's it. All right. Let's
How things on the ambulance, Adam?
Oh, well,
She comes.
things been